You are not firing me because I am useful. You are not firing me because I am the only one who told you the truth, she said quietly. And for the first time that morning, Daniel Crawford stopped writing names. The pen hovered above the paper, the boardroom air thick with the sound of controlled breathing and unspoken fear. 20 employees lined along the glass wall watching their careers dissolve line by line as the new CEO executed what the media would later call the cleanest corporate purge in Manhattan history. But inside that room, it felt less like strategy and more like a silent collapse. Emily Carter stood near the end of the line, her uniform simple, her hands still, her expression unreadable, not pleading, not angry, just present. Daniel did not look at faces. He looked at numbers, and the numbers said the company was bleeding, inefficient, corrupted by complacency. And he had been brought in to fix it, to cut fast and without hesitation, because hesitation cost millions. You all had your chance, he said without raising his voice, yet it carried across the room like something heavier than sound. This company does not fail because of the market. It fails because of people who stopped paying attention. A few eyes lowered, a few jaws tightened, but no one spoke. The list moved on, one name after another, each step echoing on polished marble, each life shifting in quiet shock. Emily did not move when her name approached. She only watched the pen, watched the way it slowed, almost imperceptibly, just before reaching her. Outside, rain streaked down the glass in thin lines, turning the city into a blurred watercolor of gray and steel. Inside, time seemed to narrow to that single motion of ink on paper. Daniel finally looked up, just for a second, just enough to meet her eyes. It was not defiance he saw, not fear, but something unsettlingly calm, like she had already accepted whatever came next long before he walked into the room. He moved on without marking her name. Everyone here is dismissed, he said, closing the folder with a soft, decisive sound. Except her. The room shifted, confusion replacing fear, heads turning, whispers forming before, being swallowed by the weight of his presence. Emily remained still. She did not step forward. She did not react. She simply waited. Daniel gestured slightly, a signal more than an instruction, and the others filed out slowly, some glancing back at her, trying to understand what she had that they did not. When the door closed, silence settled again, heavier now, more deliberate. Daniel walked to the window, hands behind his back, looking out over a city that never stopped moving, even when everything inside a single room had just changed forever. You wrote the report, he said without turning. Emily's voice was soft, but steady. Yes. Another pause, longer this time. You are a waitress, he continued, as if stating a fact that did not quite fit with the rest of the equation. Yes. The same answer, the same calm. Daniel finally turned, studying her properly now, not as a position, but as a variable he had not accounted for. Then explain to me why a waitress is the only person in this building who noticed a discrepancy that cost this company $12 million over 6 months. Emily did not rush to answer. She stepped forward just enough for the light to catch her face, revealing not confidence, not arrogance, but clarity. Because I was not supposed to notice, she said, and for the first time, the room felt smaller. Daniel said nothing. The pen rested on the table, forgotten. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, something had already begun to shift. The hallway outside the boardroom filled with low voices and quick footsteps. But inside, the silence remained untouched, like a space cut out from the rest of the building. Daniel did not sit, and neither did Emily. The distance between them measured not in feet, but in assumptions that had not yet been spoken. Start from the beginning, he said, his tone controlled, but no longer dismissive. Emily nodded once, as if she had been expecting the question long before it was asked. 3 months ago, I noticed a pattern in the receipts, she began, her words simple, precise, small inconsistencies, rounding errors that always favored the same vendor. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not in disbelief, but in recognition. That vendor is approved at the highest level, he said. Yes, she replied, which is why no one questioned it. She stepped closer to the table, placing a folded set of printed pages down with careful alignment. Not dramatic, not rushed, just deliberate. The errors were never large enough to trigger alerts, but they were consistent enough to accumulate. Daniel did not touch the papers immediately. He watched her instead, the way she spoke without hesitation, without trying to impress, without trying to defend herself. "And you decided to investigate," he said. "I decided to understand," she corrected softly. That small difference hung in the air longer than expected. Daniel finally reached for the documents, scanning the numbers, the timestamps, the annotations written in clean, structured handwriting. This was not guesswork, not intuition alone. This was analysis. "You sent this to your manager," he said, already knowing the answer. Emily nodded, and he ignored it. "He said it was not my place," she replied. Daniel exhaled slowly, not out of frustration, but out of confirmation. The system had not failed because it lacked intelligence. It had failed because it rejected it. "Why did you not escalate it further?" he asked, looking up again. Emily's expression did not change, but something quieter moved beneath it. "Because I needed proof that would not be dismissed." Daniel leaned back slightly, the weight of the situation settling into a different shape now. This was no longer about firing employees. This was about understanding why the only person who saw the truth was the one no one listened to. "So you kept watching," he said. "Yes." "And collecting?" "Yes." Another pause, but this one felt different, less tense, more focused. "Do you understand what this means?" Daniel asked. Emily met his gaze, not challenging, not avoiding. "It means the problem was never the numbers," she said. "It was who was allowed to read them." The words did not land loudly, but they stayed. Daniel closed the file, his fingers resting on the cover as if weighing something invisible. Outside, the hallway noise had faded, replaced by the distant hum of a building. Returning to routine, unaware that inside one room, the definition of value had just begun to change. "You stayed," he said finally, almost to himself. Emily did not respond. She did not need to. The answer was already in the space between them. The rain had softened by the time Daniel left the boardroom, but the air still carried the heaviness of what had just happened, a kind of quiet aftermath that lingered in corners and reflections. Emily walked beside him, not ahead, not behind, matching his pace without effort, her presence neither intrusive nor hesitant. The employees who remained in the building avoided direct eye contact, not out of fear alone, but uncertainty, as if the rules they had relied on no longer applied. Daniel noticed it, but did not acknowledge it. Instead, he moved toward his office, a space designed to command control, glass walls, minimal distractions, a view that stretched across the city like a reminder of scale. He gestured for her to enter. She did, standing near the window, her hands loosely clasped, observing without appearing to observe. Daniel placed the file on his desk, opening it again, slower this time, as if the numbers might reveal something new under different attention. "You worked in finance before," he said, not asking. Emily shook her head slightly. "I studied it," she said, "for 2 years." And then, a brief pause. Not uncomfortable, just measured. "Life changed," she replied. Daniel did not press further, not because he was not curious, but because he understood that some answers were not needed to understand the present. "You realize that what you found could lead to legal consequences," he said. "Yes." "For people who were in positions of trust?" "Yes." Her responses remained steady, not detached, but grounded. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of responsibility shifting from decision to action. "Most people would have stayed quiet," he said. Emily's eyes moved slightly toward the city, then back. "Most people were not expected to see it," she answered. The difference again, subtle, but precise. Daniel allowed himself a moment of silence, not to think, but to listen to what had already been said. "Do you want something in return?" he asked, the question direct, almost abrupt. Emily considered it, not long, but enough to show it mattered. "I want the system to work," she said. Daniel almost smiled, not out of amusement, but recognition. That answer did not fit the patterns he was used to, and that was exactly why it mattered. "That is not a small request," he said. "No," she replied. The conversation did not escalate, did not soften. It simply deepened. Outside, the clouds began to break. thin lines of light touching the edges of buildings, reflecting in the glass walls of the office. Daniel closed the file again, this time with intention. "Then we start there," he said. Emily nodded, not as agreement, but as acknowledgement. Something had shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough that the next decisions would not follow the same logic as the last. And for the first time since he entered the building that morning, Daniel Crawford was not thinking about what to remove, but what had almost been lost. The following hours unfolded without announcement. No meeting called, no statement released, yet the building itself seemed to sense the change, a subtle recalibration that moved through departments like a quiet current. Daniel did not return to the boardroom. He remained in his office, reviewing internal systems, cross-checking reports, tracing the pattern Emily had identified back through layers of approval that now looked less like structure and more like concealment. Emily stayed nearby, not sitting unless asked, not speaking unless necessary, but when she did, her words aligned with the data in a way that made correction possible without resistance. "This approval chain is too narrow," she said at one point, pointing to a section of the report. "It allows consistency without visibility." Daniel adjusted the structure, expanding oversight, not adding complexity, but redistributing it. The changes were small on paper, but significant in impact. By late afternoon, the first internal alert triggered, a discrepancy caught earlier than it ever had before. Daniel looked at the notification, then at Emily. She did not react. She simply waited. "It is working," he said. "It is visible," she corrected. Again, the difference mattered. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the city sharper, clearer, as if the storm had been a necessary interruption. Inside, the tension had not disappeared, but it had shifted into focus. Daniel stood, moving toward the window, his reflection overlapping with the skyline. "Do you know how many people told me to cut deeper?" he said. Emily remained still. "They said the problem was excess," he continued. "Too many people, too many variables." He paused, then added quietly, "They were wrong." Emily did not respond with agreement. She did not need to. The evidence was already unfolding. A second alert appeared, then a third, each one confirming the same pattern, the same oversight, now exposed. Daniel turned back, the distance between authority and understanding narrowing in a way he had not expected. "You were almost removed," he said. Emily met his gaze. "Yes, and the system would have continued exactly as before." Yes, the simplicity of it made it heavier. Daniel exhaled, not out of relief, but clarity. "We are not done," he said. Emily nodded. "No," she replied. The conversation did not need to continue, because the direction had already been set. What had started as a purge had become something else entirely, something quieter, more precise, and far more difficult to ignore. Evening settled over the city with a calm that contrasted the intensity of the day. Lights flickering on across buildings as if signaling continuity. But inside the company, continuity no longer meant the same thing. Daniel called a small group back into the office. Not the ones who had been the loudest, not the ones with the highest titles, but the ones whose work intersected directly with the systems Emily had analyzed. They entered cautiously, unsure of what version of leadership they were about to face. Emily stood slightly to the side, not hidden, not highlighted, simply present. "We are restructuring the approval process," Daniel began, his tone measured, effective immediately. He did not raise his voice, but the clarity in it removed any room for interpretation. "Every transaction above a defined threshold will require cross-verification from independent departments. A few exchanged glances, not in disagreement, but recalculation. And internal reporting will be open to audit from any level of staff," he continued. This time, the reaction was more visible, a shift in posture, a recognition that the hierarchy had just been altered. "Transparency is not optional," he said. One of the managers hesitated before speaking. "That could slow operations." Daniel looked at him, not dismissive, but direct. "So does losing $12 million, he replied. The room quieted. Emily watched, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of steady attention that did not seek validation. The meeting ended quickly, not because there was nothing more to say, but because the decisions had already been made. As the group left, One of them paused near Emily, as if considering a question, then chose not to ask it. When the door closed, the office returned to stillness. Daniel leaned against the desk. The weight of leadership no longer abstract, but defined by the consequences of both action and inaction. They will resist, he said. Emily nodded. Yes, and you, he added, will not be invisible anymore. A brief silence followed. Emily's expression remained calm, but something softer moved beneath it. I was never invisible, she said, just ignored. Daniel absorbed that without response. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the quiet correction taking place within one building. Inside, the line between who was seen and who was heard had begun to dissolve, not through force, but through clarity that could no longer be dismissed. The next morning arrived without ceremony, but the atmosphere inside the building felt different, less uncertain, more alert, as if something unseen had shifted into alignment. Daniel arrived earlier than usual, not out of urgency, but intention, his steps quieter, more deliberate. Emily was already there, reviewing updated reports at a workstation that did not belong to her title, but now seemed to fit her role. She looked up briefly as he entered, acknowledging him without interruption. 3 new flags overnight, she said, sliding a tablet across the desk. Daniel scanned them. The patterns consistent, the exposure immediate. They did not expect the system to change this quickly, he said. They expected it to stay comfortable, she replied. Again, the difference carried weight. Daniel set the tablet down, considering the broader implications, not just of the discrepancies, but of the culture that allowed them. You are not returning to the floor, he said. It was not a question. Emily paused, just slightly, then nodded. Understood. You will work directly with me, he continued, until this is resolved. She did not respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but thought. Then we should define what resolved means, she said. Daniel looked at her, recognizing the necessity of the question. It means the system no longer depends on who is watching, he answered. Emily nodded once. Then it is not resolved yet. The exchange was simple, but it redefined the objective. Outside, the early light reflected off glass and steel, the city beginning another cycle, unaware that inside, the metrics of success had been quietly rewritten. A notification sound broke the moment, another alert, another inconsistency caught in real time. Daniel allowed himself a brief pause, not to celebrate, but to acknowledge the direction. You changed the way this place sees itself, he said. Emily shook her head slightly. I only showed what was already there. The humility was not performative, it was accurate. Daniel turned toward the window, the reflection now including both of them, not as hierarchy, but as function. Most people speak when they want to be heard, he said. You waited until it mattered. Emily did not answer. She did not need to. The work continued, not loudly, not visibly, but effectively, and for the first time, effectiveness was not measured by speed or scale, but by clarity that could not be ignored. Days passed without spectacle, yet the impact of the changes became increasingly difficult to overlook. Discrepancies reduced, processes tightened, and more importantly, awareness expanded across levels that had previously operated in isolation. Daniel moved through meetings with less emphasis on authority and more on precision, his questions sharper, his expectations clearer. Emily remained close to the systems, not seeking visibility, but ensuring consistency. Her presence felt not through position, but through results that spoke without exaggeration. One afternoon, Daniel placed a document on the table between them, a formal offer, structured, detailed, aligned with the level of responsibility she had already been carrying. Head of Internal Audit, he said. The title deliberate, not symbolic. Emily looked at the paper, not with excitement, not with hesitation, but with a kind of measured distance, as if evaluating more than just the role. This reflects what you are already doing, Daniel added. She traced a line of text with her eyes, then closed the document gently. It reflects what you need, she said, not what I agreed to. Daniel did not react immediately, the distinction settling in. You identified a problem, he said. You helped fix it. We started fixing it, she corrected. Again, the difference mattered. And now you are offering me a position after removing people who were not given the same chance to be heard. The room grew quieter, not tense, but honest. Daniel met her gaze, not defensive, not dismissive. They had access, he said. Emily nodded, and they were never asked to use it differently. The conversation did not escalate, it deepened. Daniel exhaled slowly, recognizing the weight of what was being said, not as accusation, but as perspective. What do you want? He asked, the question no longer transactional. Emily considered it, not briefly, not impulsively. I want the structure to remain open, she said. Not just when it is convenient, not just when it benefits leadership. Daniel absorbed that, not as condition, but as principle. And the position? He asked. Emily looked at the document once more, then back at him. Respect should not come after damage, she said quietly. The words did not reject the offer, they redefined its meaning. Daniel nodded, not in agreement alone, but in understanding. Outside, the city moved forward, unaware that inside one office, a decision had been made that did not follow the usual logic of promotion and reward. Inside, the standard had shifted, not through authority, but through clarity that refused to be reduced to a title. The final adjustments to the system were implemented without announcement. No press release, no internal celebration, just a quiet alignment of processes that now operated with a level of transparency that made concealment difficult and accountability natural. Daniel stood in the same boardroom where it had all begun, the same table, the same glass walls. But the atmosphere was no longer defined by fear or uncertainty. It was defined by awareness. The remaining staff sat with a different posture, not relaxed, but attentive, as if they understood that what mattered now was not avoiding mistakes, but recognizing them early. Emily stood near the window, not at the center, not at the edge, exactly where she had always been, present without demanding attention. Daniel closed the final report, the numbers clear, the losses contained, the system stable. This company does not survive because we removed people, he said, his voice steady. It survives because we changed what we ignore. No one responded, not because they disagreed, but because the statement required no reinforcement. His gaze moved briefly toward Emily, not as acknowledgement, but as recognition of what had made the change possible. She did not react. She simply stood, the same calm, the same clarity. The meeting ended without applause, without formal conclusion, just a quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted. As the room emptied, Daniel remained for a moment, looking at the table, the place, where he had once written names without hesitation. Now, the pen rested unused. He picked it up, not to sign, but to hold, as if reconsidering what it represented. Behind him, Emily moved toward the door, her steps light, unhurried. You could have left, Daniel said without turning. She paused, then answered, So could you. The simplicity of it settled into the space between them. She left the room, the door closing softly, leaving Daniel alone with the reflection of a man who had come to cut and stayed to understand. Outside, the city continued, unchanged and constant, but inside, something quieter remained, a standard raised without announcement, a shift that did not need recognition to exist. And in the absence of noise, the lesson carried further than any statement ever could, that integrity does not compete, it remains, even when everything else is removed.